Hello there everyone, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns and today I'm going to show you how to make this multi-strand wire crochet bracelet. So it is one cohesive piece of jewelry, but we get the effect of multiple strands going around the wrist. And I also show you how to add beads to it to get a bit of colour to the piece, so if you want to learn how to make it, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. First of all, the wire that I'm using is this 0.3mm regular round silver coated copper wire. And then I'm using some 3mm round beads here to add some colour to the piece. I happen to be using 5 different colours and finishes of beads, but obviously you can mix and match yours however you want to, or even use less colours or just one. That's completely up to you. Now of course I'm then going to need a crochet hook here to be able to make the piece, so this is a 1.25mm crochet hook. And as for the findings, I'm using these ribbon ends to finish off the ends of the piece, and they have these little loops where we can attach our findings. So I've got a lobster claw clasp, extender chain, and of course some jump rings. Now make sure to check out the description box below the video because I'm going to have the material list and links that you might need written out. Otherwise, let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. So what I'm going to do is work with the wire here still attached to the reel. So I'm not cutting off a length because it's hard to know how much we're going to need, and we're going to need a fair bit anyway. So it's still attached to the reel, but obviously I'm going to start working towards the open end of the wire. So I'm going to take the end here and kind of put it into my hand, and then just put the long end we're going to be working with over my index finger. And then I take my crochet hook, because first of all we just need to make our initial loop. So I put my crochet hook underneath. You can see it going over there, and then all I'm going to do is twist this around. One full rotation, and you can see we then get a first little loop. So we have a short end there, which you can just use to hold on to here in the beginning. And then this is the first loop. I'm going to keep holding on to it like this. So I'm holding on with my index finger and my thumb down where the crochet hook is, kind of where I'm working to keep control. And then I have the long end of the wire coming out and away from me, but holding it a bit taut with my finger here. Now what we need to first do is make a row of loops, or a chain as it's called. So I keep my crochet hook through that first loop. I then go over the top of the wire and then grab onto it with that little hook. Bring it back through. Now the beginning is always the most fiddly part because it's not that much to hold on to, but that's why using the little tail is always helpful. And then I'm pushing the hook all the way through until the shaft part there, so before the grip part, and then I pull it a little bit further. Then I twist my crochet hook around and then push it back, so basically to flatten the loop, so it ends up sitting flat basically on top of the first one. So you can see from the side they are flat next to each other. So through this one here we've now got 2 loops. I'm bringing the wire through by grabbing onto it, pushing the crochet hook through, pulling it a little bit further, then twisting it and pushing it up and away from me. And there is the next loop. You can always go back through previous loops and put your crochet hook through them if you need to kind of straighten them out a little bit or readjust the size. You can now see we have a chain of 3 loops here. Continue. Do the next one, and obviously the more comfortable you get, the quicker you'll be able to go. So if I just take this out, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops now. Just want to go through that previous one again. And then bring the wire through to make the 6th loop. So we have 6 loops in a row. So this is basically our first row, and I have 6 loops. Now it's up to you if you want to make 6 like here, or you maybe want to make less or you want to make more. It completely depends on the look that you want, because what I'm going to end up with here, I've made 6 loops in this one, and I'm also going to end up with 6 lengths going across the bracelets. So what's going to look like is kind of individual lengths, but obviously they're all attached together. Now say if you wanted to make less, so you want a narrow bracelet, you want it less lengths across, you can maybe make 4, it would be narrow. Or if you want it wider, you could make more loops than this. It will all be the same principle and technique, but it will just be wider or narrower and more or less rows basically. So that's completely up to you. Now I'm going to just put my crochet hook back through that final loop we made, the 6th one. And then I'm going to bring the wire through to create a new loop. But instead of just continuing the row, moving in that same direction, what I'm going to do is just change the way I'm holding this. So kind of put it more sideways. And then I'm going to force this loop, still flatten it down and away from me, but I'm going to make it go, basically change direction. So up over it here, because this is going to start the next row. We're going to build a row on top of this and go back across. And this is the first one of the next row, so you can see row 1 and then step up, and then we're going to create row 2. So that's the first one. Bring a loop through, and then don't worry if it goes a little bit out of shape. We can always take a crochet hook out, look at things and reshape things. But then this loop here that I just brought through, we need to make sure this second row is obviously connected to the first row. So that means the first loop I made is going to be in the next row, sorry. This one here, I'm going to go back down. I'm going through the loop with a crochet hook, and then I'm going to go straight through the next loop in the previous row, sorry. So like this. So I still then have the first loop I made for the second row just before, kind of sticking up and out and away. And now otherwise I have 2 wires here, so basically 2 loops now laying on top of each other. And then I'm going to bring the wire through both of those to create another loop, pushing the crochet hook through to the shaft part so every loop becomes the same size. And then this loop here, I'm going to pull it out a little bit more, and this is going to be the second loop in row 2. So bring it up and flatten it out to sit next to the first one. And then bring the wire through to create the next loop, which we then need to bring down, straight down through the next loop on the bottom row. And then again we're going to have 2 wires there, or 2 loops sitting on top of each other. And then pull the wire through to create the next loop, which is going to then go up. So we're alternating between making a loop that goes up and is part of the new row, and then the next loop is part of the original row, because that's how we attach them, keep them attached together. So that's the third one. And then go down. So we're kind of working our way backwards now through the first row, while adding a new loop every time we do, and thereby creating the second row. So that's the 4th one. Bring the wire through, come down to the next one, and as you can see, you can keep taking your crochet hook out to look at anything, to readjust anything whenever you need to, because nothing's going to come undone because it's wire that we're working with. Just get that tail out of the way, then bring that loop up as a 5th one on the next row, the second row there. And then we're getting towards the end of this one, through the final loop on the bottom row, or the first row, which was actually the first loop that we made, but obviously it's the final one that we're going through now. Push them together, and then bring the wire through. Make sure to bring it through both. Just want to make sure they're sitting properly. Like this. Push it all the way up to the shaft part, and then use this to create the final loop on the second row here that we're making. And if you need to, you can take your crochet hook, go through any loops that we've already made to, first of all, if you need to kind of, if they've shrunk a little bit, or you need to readjust them, or readjust how they're sitting. But otherwise, we now have 2 rows there sitting on top of each other with 6 loops in each. So now we have our first 2 rows in place here, and this is the side that we're working on. We have the short tail where we started out, coming out to this side here. Now, after making this second row, we now want to start making our third row. So to do this, what I'm going to do is flip this over. So my short tail is coming out in the opposite direction, like that. And then I put my crochet hook through the same loop, so the final loop on the other side that we made, which is that one there. As I flipped it around, it's now then just on the opposite side, obviously, but I want to go through that same loop, just coming from this side now, and I'm bringing the long end of my wire around and then holding it in the same position. And then what we want to do to continue making our row is grab onto the wire, so go over the wire, and then grab onto it with the hook part and bring it through the loop and push it all the way to that shank part of the crochet hook to just enlarge it. Now I'm pulling it out a little bit more, and then I'm going to bring this loop up to be the new loop on the next row. So the very first loop on the third row here is what that's going to be. Then as I'm through that, I'm going to go over to grab onto the wire, bring it through the loop to create a new loop. And this loop, because this row that we're making now, we still have to connect to the previous row. So that means this one here is going to go through the next loop on the previous row. And you can see the new loop that we made is kind of going to sit in between the 2 loops on the previous row. And then bring the crochet hook over the wire to bring it through to create a new loop. And then bring that up and flatten it down to be the second loop on the new row. And obviously we need to connect it, so the next loop comes and sits on top of the next loop in the previous row, so it all stays one piece. And basically this is how we create another row from now on. Creating a new loop to be part of the new row, and the next loop to be part of the previous row. And we're just working our way all the way across, one loop at a time. You can see we're slowly getting towards the end now. And of course we want to end up with the same amount of loops in this new row as we have in the other one. So that means 6 in total. Final one to go through on the previous row. There we go, and then we just need to make the final loop for the new row. There we go. Now as you can see, it looks a little bit wonky now, so that's why I like to go in and then just kind of go through everything and readjust anything. So I basically focus on the new row that we just made. I like to take my crochet hook, put it through it, and then just make sure it's first of all the right side so it's not gotten smaller or larger, and then just readjusting anything. Like the positioning of the loops as well, you can kind of bring them more in the right position like this, and then that final loop. So you can see that row is now ready. It's finished, but it's also now ready in position to be able to make the next one. So we now have 3 rows of loops here, and I'm going to make one more. So I'm going to flip my piece around again, because every time we now start a new row, we flip the piece around and go through the same loop that we finished on, but just coming through it from the opposite side. And then the length of wire comes around the side to again be at the back of the piece. And now we just start this row in the same way. The first one is up and away to be the first loop in the new row. Next one connects to the previous row. And we'll keep alternating like that. Basically up, down, up, down, all the way to the end in the same way that I showed you on the previous one. Next one connecting to the bottom, or to the previous row rather. And we're getting towards the end. Final loop on the previous row, and then the final loop in the new row. And again, you can see, just want to readjust a little bit. So just use your crochet hook to do that, maneuver anything around, and kind of line everything up. And this is now row number 4. So here we have 4 rows in total. And this is what I'm going to be starting with. So I've just got these 4 rows because we just needed a little section here where everything is connected before we make the individual lengths kind of little sections. So it is one full complete piece, and also we have these ends to be able to use our ribbon ends at the end here to finish off the ends of a bracelet with. So this is basically the beginning part. So now to start making the individual lengths from here, because they are connected to these end pieces, but obviously we need to make them as one length at a time kind of. So I'm just going to start from where I've ended up here. So I have this loop, the final loop that I made in the previous row. I'm just going to start from that. And then I'm going to work from this. Like I said, I have 6 loops here on my rows. Obviously, if you have less, so if you have 4, for instance, you would just need to make 4 lengths of the sections, or if you have more. But what I'm going to do is start with each of these loops one at a time. And I'm starting with that very first one where I'm already at. So what I'm going to do is have my crochet hook through it, and then bring the wire through to make a new loop. Then I want to bring it up and over and flatten the loop, so it's flat. Now all I'm going to be doing here is basically making a chain of loops, kind of like we did in the beginning. So bring another through, and then turn the crochet hook, flatten it down. So if we include counting the very first loop that we started from, that was part of that last row that we made, I have 3 loops here. And you basically just want to continue like this, making a row or a chain of loops that are then coming out and away from this main piece with the several rows underneath each other. So you can see, just going to continue like this. Now how many loops you do in these chains here will obviously determine the size of your final piece. So that is really up to you. You can measure it as you go as well. Just keep in mind that it will probably shrink just a little bit. So I now finished the length here, and you can see the whole length of loops. It's attached to that very first loop from the original piece that we made with the rows. And in this case here, I've made 50 loops, including that first one. So like I said, it's up to you obviously how many you make. That will determine the length. I've made 50 in this case. Now what we need to do is basically from this end, work our way back down. So I'm just putting my crochet hook back through that last loop that I made. And then I'm going to again bring the wire through to create a new loop. And just pull it through a little bit. Now instead of continuing the chain, working away like this, I'm going to take this loop, make sure my crochet hook is through, and then I'm going to go straight through the previous loop, like that. And then just pull on the wire a bit so that new loop that I made is going to be tight around the crochet hook, so the size is going to be the same. Then take the crochet hook over the wire to pull through to make a new loop and pull it out a little bit like this. So the way I like to do that is because obviously again it's not a whole lot to hold on to. I like to kind of push the crochet hook through to create the loop and then kind of hold on to the sides of the other loops here, the chain, while I'm then pulling it further out. And then this loop, I'm going to go keep my crochet hook through it and go straight through the next loop down, all the way through to the shank part, what we do every time. Pull a new loop through, and go straight through the next one down. So you can see we're working our way back down the chain that we made. Now this obviously becomes more rigid than in the first place. We're basically going to have 2 layers of loops now on top of each other. But also the point of this is we're working our way back down to this part down here so we can continue, move on to the next step. So literally just one at a time, bring a loop through, pull it out a bit so we can reach through to the next loop in the original chain that we made, and just work your way all the way down to the end like I said. So I now reach back down to the beginning of the chain here, and then what I'm going to do is, because obviously we need to kind of have it attached nicely and securely as well, so I've gone through that first loop, which was part of the very last row that we made. What I'm then going to do is this loop that I have ready here, I'm going to go straight down to the next one. So in the next row down, which was originally the third one, I'm going to go through there and then bring a new loop through, go down through the next one. Now I'm on this outer edge for each one of them, and then down to the very last one. And then what I'm going to do is just turn the piece a bit and then go to the next loop over. That's right next to it. And then again, I'm turning my piece, because what I want to do is I want to get up basically and reach the very next loop in line on that very last row that we did. To do that, all I'm going to do is basically come up right next to where I just went down. So bring this loop with me. Gonna go through the next one, bring the wire through both of them, and then through the equivalent loop in the next row to then come through the very final loop, which is the one that we want to be coming out of. Create a new loop, and then this is where we want to start this next chain. So the loop that I just made, just going to turn the piece again a little bit, because this I want to then be a new loop to start coming outward again, just like here, having one loop after another, creating that chain. So we keep doing that, bringing the wire through, creating a loop, and then bringing it out to sit above the previous one. So that's basically all we do here. We continue to do until we've done it all the way across. So I made my first chain here all the way to the end, and I came back down on myself. Then I went all the way down when I made it down to the end to make sure I secure it properly. Came up to the next loop in line. I'm going to make a chain the same length, so you could measure, but I prefer to count the amount of loops that I make. So I'm going to make the same amount of loops, come back down that one again, come down, go back up next to it to reach the next one, and basically continue like that until, in my case here, I've done a chain coming out from each of these loops on the very last row that we did. So now I made all of these sections of chains, and then going back down the other direction, and then I made the final one and ended up down here in this far corner. So this is what we ended up with now. We have these kind of legs dangling around, but obviously they're just loose for now. So what I'm going to do is actually cut off this wire, because we're done using it for this part. So I'm going to cut it off so we can have an open end, and I always like leaving a little length just so we can finish off the end here. And I'm just going to pull that loop through. So there we go. So this part is just finished for now. And now what we need to do is start working on the other end. But before we start doing any crochet at all, we need to add our beads to the length of wire. So I'm going to take my length of wire here, and I'm using a length that's now still attached to the reel, because we cut the other piece off. This piece is attached to the reel still. And then I'm just going to take a bead at a time, because I'm mixing up the beads here, the colours, and just add them onto the length of wire, and just do it however you want to. So you need to add all your beads before we start. Now, rather add too many than too few, because you can always just not use them all, rather than if you don't add enough, you can't really add any more. So just add a bunch of beads onto your length of wire. So I now added my beads here to the length of wire, and then all you just want to do is push them all the way down and out of the way for now, because we're not going to start using them straight away. And then we just have the open end of the wire to begin with here. So basically what we want to start doing here is the exact same thing that we did when we started out the other piece. So we basically want to start this first section of making rows of the loops. So you just want to start the same way, put the end of the wire there over your finger, start making the first loop just by doing a little twist, and then straight away go in and make a chain. And of course, because I did 6 on the other one, I need to do 6 on this one as well. So bring the loop through, flatten it, and do 6 in a row here. So that's the 3. 4, 5, and the 6th one. And that's where we then need to bring another loop through, but instead of just continuing it, I need to just turn this a bit and bring it up. Just change direction basically. So it sits like that. And that's the beginning of row 2. So this is the exact same as the other end. So just repeat this, doing the same amount of rows as we did before. So I now finished making this piece here, and this is going to end up being the other end, and it's going to also then connect the loose ends of these sections, so the chains that we made here, together, doing that one at a time, because you can see it's equivalent to the beginning that we did. And along doing that, we're also going to be adding in the beads. Obviously you don't have to do that, but if you want to add the beads in. Now what you'll find on the piece here is that there is kind of a front and a back to it. It's not really too crucial because they look very similar, but personally there is kind of a front that looks a bit cleaner, whereas the back, some of the wire crosses over a bit differently. So what I'm going to do is just flip this around to the back. Like I said, it's not really too important, but it's just what I prefer to do. And then I'm just going to kind of start picking out one of these sections, and I'm doing the one furthest away because that's going to match up with where my wire is, that loop I'm working with, the last one that I did here. And just making sure that I'm on the right side and it's not twisted around. What I'm then going to do is put my crochet hook through the very last loop there on this section, the open end, and then also through the very last loop that I made here, so the loop that I would continue working with, like that. And then we have this length that we are making loops with, so the long end, that's still attached to the real end that has all the beads on it. So what we're going to do now is work with one of these sections at a time, and when we've gone through this, because we now have one loop from the other end, the other half that we already made, and then one loop from this half that we just made. Once we bring these together by making the next loop, that's then connected it in the first part. So just hold on to them best you can at the same time. Now here I'm just going to be bringing the wire through without worrying about any beads just yet. So bring through, make a loop by bringing that wire out, and what we're going to be doing is working our way up the length of this section that we picked out first, all the way up to the other end, and that's where we're going to be adding the beads along the way. So this loop that I just brought out, I'm going to bring my crochet hook through that and straight through the very next loop in that section, and just straighten everything out. Pull things a bit tight if you need to, and then make the next loop. Now the reason that I turned this piece, because I feel that there's a bit of a front and a back, is because I want the beads to end up sitting on that front side. And I think I might as well start adding the beads in now. I'll show you how to do that. So they're on the way already, like I said. I'm going to just bring the first one up, and then before I go through and do the next loop, so first of all I can just bring the crochet hook, make sure to go through that loop, and you can also go through the next one. So basically get your hook into position. Tighten the wire if you need to. Then bring the bead down before you bring the crochet hook over the wire, and make sure the bead is sitting basically right up against all the loops here, right next to the crochet hook. When you then go over and grab onto the wire, make sure the bead stays there, while you're then bringing the wire through to create make sure to go through all the loops to create the next one. Push it through, pull it out a bit, and then if I flip it around, you'll be able to see that the bead now sits nicely on that side. And then really this part is up to you how you want it to look. I kind of like mine to be a bit random, so I don't necessarily have a specific system or pattern that I add these beads in. I kind of just add them here and there. Sometimes I leave maybe one loop between the beads, or maybe leave 3 other times, just to basically make it seem random. That's also what I've done with the different colors and finishes on the beads. So when they're going to get distributed on the piece here, it's going to kind of end up looking random. So go through the next loop, like this. And then I think in the next one here, I'll add another bead. And go through there, get the crochet hook into position, and before going around the wire, bring the next bead up, let it fall all the way down, and then bring the crochet hook over and then pull it through all the loops. Like that. Create a new loop, and again on the other side, the bead now sits nicer there, and here we then have a bit of a gap between them. So like I said, here you can see kind of 2 loops between the beads. Sometimes I'll do so you can just see 1, or maybe so you can see 3. So it's up to you how much of a distance you want. So basically how full of beads, or if you want less beads on there. That's really up to you and the look that you want. But otherwise you just keep going like this all the way along to the other end here, where it's already connected, and add the beads whenever you want to. So now I made it all the way to the other end here. You can see I have my next loop ready, and it's connected now on both ends. This particular section is, and you can see the beads all the way along and how I kind of dispersed them a bit randomly. So that's what it looks like so far. Now on here, what we basically just need to do is make our way to the next section. So the very one next to it. Just get these tails out the way. So I've got the loop here that I made ready. All I'm going to do is, you can see here, this is the very last loop that I went through in this section. I'm just going to go straight over to the first one in the next section, because we've already gone through this end when we were making these lengths. So I'm just going to go straight through there and just bring my wire with me here. Just, these are the tails, just kind of get them out of the way. And then bring a loop through, and then again I'm turning this because now I reached the next section. So I'm literally right at the beginning of that. So I'm just going to focus on doing the same thing to that I just did to the first one there. Now on this end is where it's already connected, so we literally just go straight through the next loop. And just obviously kind of work around these other sections and lengths of wire, just so we don't get tangled up. And then whenever you want to, add in a bead before bringing the crochet hook over. And then we bring through, so we get our next loop. And otherwise, same principle, work your way all the way to the other end, adding in beads as well. And then obviously when we get to the other end, we then need to connect this one down here. So now that I made it to the other end here, we then need to attach this section to this other end as well. So basically we just need to do the same thing, but obviously we're kind of working from the opposite direction. So you just want to first of all make sure the length fits, because what you might find is that even if you've made these sections here, or these when we originally made them, with the same amount of loops, they might have slightly different lengths. So if you find that maybe one is longer, what you will do is just align them. So just make sure to measure it before you actually start to connect them. So if this, for instance, was longer, so instead of fitting perfectly with lining up with that outer loop there, you might find that you have further loops coming down, which is absolutely fine. You can just have them coming further down there, so laying on top of the others. There's absolutely no problem. That just makes sure that obviously you kind of line it up compared to the other lengths. So here you can see this one looks pretty good, and obviously you might find that you have one that's shorter, so either you can go off with the short one and actually do it from that length, or you can always just add a few extra loops here to the ends as well. So that's always a fix you can do too. Now here I just need to attach this, so I'm going to put my crochet hook through those final loops and then through the next loop here, so the second one on this last row, because obviously it's the second section that we're doing. And then I want to bring the wire through to create a new loop. And now because on this end here we haven't gone over this as much as we have on the other end, what I'm going to do, instead of just moving over to the next one, I'm going to take this loop and actually go down, follow the loops down here and get all the way to the very first row, just to kind of give it a little bit extra strength. So basically like we did on the other end when we were creating these sections, I'm just doing it on this end here now that we're connecting the sections. But the aim is still to get to the next loop over. So obviously we can grab the next section and connect that as well. I just like doing it this way, so we add a bit more, you could say, bulk on this end, but also just strength and sturdiness. Get to the very last loop. Now I'm going to turn the piece to move over to the next one. So I can then make my way by turning the piece again. Basically up in the same way, following the other loops here until I get to that outer loop where I need to start. Just get my wires out of the way. Start connecting that next section. So we have the loop in place, just got to find the right place to go through. There we go. Working my way up. Until I now get to that very final loop. Now what I just want to do before I go through that is check how this section fits with it. So make sure the others are kind of stretched out just right, and then see if this one also happens to fit perfectly. That would be lovely. But like I said, it's not too big of a deal if it doesn't. So for instance, if you found that this one is too long as well, but obviously this is the side where we're actually starting to connect it, you could always measure that, and if this overlaps by several loops here, you could always start the connecting further down as we worked our way up towards this outer loop. So that is one way to deal with it, but if it does fit, just go through the end loop and then through that loop in the section that we got to. And then this is the way of connecting this. So obviously this basically just starts out the same way as the first one. We have the wire that we're working with. So you literally just want to start making loops to connect this one all the way along, and of course along the way add in your beads as well. And this is basically what you want to keep doing. So it's going up from here. We're going to be going up this section all the way to the other end, and then here we're going to move over to the next section, come back up there, and basically back and forth like this along the way, connecting these loose ends to the other end there that we made until we've done it with all of them, and also obviously adding in the beads as well. So just keep going like this until you've connected all of them. So I now finished attaching all the lengths here to that other end, and it looks like this all the way along. You can see the effect that we get. And then I finished up down here. I already cut this wire off the reel, and then that very last loop I'm just going to put my crochet hook in and then pull the wire all the way through. So that is now finished as well, and we're done using that length. So now what we can do is obviously check everything is nice and we're happy with it. And what I personally like to do is, because this first end that we made is still nice and sturdy and robust, this end I feel is still a little bit more flimsy than that. So it's not too big of a deal, but you can go in and just kind of fix that and make it as robust. So basically add more layer to it. So that means you just pick up your length of wire here, that in this case is still attached to the reel, and just go in and basically start somewhere and pull it through to create a loop. And again, now I'm working on the front just to make it look like the other end. As you can see here, pull that loop through, and then you can literally just go through all the loops, follow the path kind of, and just basically strengthen it more. So go through the next one, and then obviously take the long end, pull a loop through, go through the next one. So we're just building up strength on this end so it matches the other one. So that's completely up to you if you want to spend some time doing that. So then what I'm going to do now is just get rid of all the excess lengths here of wire. So just take one at a time, and then wherever it's ended up, just want to make sure to basically wrap it around a few times to secure it. So kind of coiling around the other wire. And it is ideal if you can kind of finish off all the wires on this area where it's going to get covered with the ribbon end. So like that. Cut off the excess. And then just flatten down the end of the wire so it kind of nestles back into the gaps. So there we go. Just get rid of all the wires in a similar way. So now the ends are ready here to attach our ribbon ends. I'm going to sit like that, and obviously we're going to clamp them down, but before we do that I'm going to be adding some glue as well. So I'm using the E6000, works really well for wire and metal. So I'm going to grab a toothpick and just add a bit. And then I'm going to, first of all, put that inside the ribbon end here. So I'm going to cover the inside walls, you could say. So we don't need to fill this up or anything, just cover the inside walls. And then what I have left I like to put on the very end of the bracelet. And basically make sure I get the glue in between all the wires. So more or less you could say into the loops as well. Now if you find you don't have quite enough glue, you can always add just a little bit extra. Again, it doesn't have to be too much. But I like doing this because when we then put the two pieces together, they're gonna really adhere nicely when obviously the glue dries. So get right in there with it. And then place the ribbon end. Take some flat nose pliers and we need to start clamping this down. Now I like to start from one end and then just gradually clamp it more and more. So I don't just go into one place and then clamp it all the way down because it can slide around a little bit, as you can see. So I want to make sure that before I do my final squeeze, that it is in the middle, so it hasn't slipped to either side. But then make sure to clamp it tightly, and I also always like to go in from the side and just tighten them up. And then obviously we need to leave it to dry, and then we have these loops where we can attach our findings. So that finishes off the ends nicely, and of course you want to repeat and do the same thing on the other end as well. So once you let your glue dry and you attach your findings, your bracelet is done and ready to wear. So as you can see, you can really make it look however you want, depending what colours and materials that you choose to put together. So even though it's one cohesive piece of jewellery, we still get this effect of multiple strands going around your wrist. And you can really customize it to look however you want to, depending what materials and colours you choose to put together. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Now if you like wire crochet, I already have several tutorials on my channel, and if you don't want to miss any future ones, make sure you subscribe. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.